I recently watched a movie with my family. Now, by the end of this movie, everything was resolved, and the mother and daughter are singing together, and the mother pledges to support the happiness of her daughter, to do whatever she can to make her daughter happy. And that moment gave me pause. While I think the point of the movie, that understanding between parents and children is a good thing, was a good point, I think stopping with happiness can be dangerous. You see, we live in a culture that is increasingly concerned with personal happiness, and yet that same culture is increasingly wrought with fear and anxiety and a lack of abiding joy. And I think that's because God designed us for all joy. And yet, we're missing the point by stopping at happiness. That's why this year at Eastwood, we are going to be focusing on the quest for joy. Every day for the next 5 weeks, your students are going to be reading what I consider to be the most joyous book in the Bible, the book of Philippians. It is so full of joy, and yet it was written by a man who was willingly awaiting his own trial and execution. And in the middle of all that, Paul reminds us that he's simply following the example of Christ. You see, Jesus endured the scorn of men, the wrath of his Father, the shame of the cross, for the joy that was set before him. You see, the joy of the Lord comes from an assurance in what lies ahead, not in the happiness of what we want in the moment. And as a school, this is a quest that we feel is worthy. Look, we know that the things we do here will cause students to wrestle, to struggle. But we believe that they can do that with the hope of an ultimate victory. We know they're going to be challenged, but we also know it's worth it. And really, isn't that the way it is with everything? The things that are hard to do are worth doing. You do great things by accepting great challenges. James 1 reminds us of that. It tells us that we should count it all joy when we face trials, because eventually those trials lead to being made like Christ. The challenge of holiness. And too often, I think we are more concerned with our happiness than our holiness. Too often, we're concerned more with our children's happiness than their holiness. And then we wonder where the joy went. Well, as a parent, I want my children to understand joy. I want to be able to pray that they won't be happy if they are not following the Lord. That's a tough prayer as a parent, that my own children will be miserable if they're not following the Lord. But I also want to be praying that my children will rejoice with great joy when they do those things that honor the Lord, that please the Lord. And as a parent also, I know that the greatest challenge that we face is the challenge to model this for our kids. Will we take on that challenge of holiness, to teach them that true joy is found in that challenge? I encourage you today, ask the Holy Spirit to give you the joy of holiness when you're in the middle of the challenges. Even those little things when they don't go the way you wanted them to. That's the Lord working in us, his plan. And that is the sermon that our kids will ultimately see. The sermon of our lives. Have a great Thursday.